Thanks very much for that analysis. And as mentioned off the top of the program, our guest today is the Treasurer, Scott Morrison. He joins us live. Thanks for your company.
Good morning, great to be here.
Can I start by asking you, whilst there's been no decision on the GST, and that is a debate that we may or may not have, tax reform seems to be something that both sides of politics do acknowledge is required in a general sense. Why? Why do we have to do something about our existing tax structures?
Well, the government understands that the tax system needs changing to ensure that it can back Australians who are already out there working as hard as they can, saving for their future and investing in their own capabilities. I mean, the economy in this country is in a transition, and more broadly beyond our shores there's volatility, and Australians know that we need to move through this period, and we need a tax system that supports them to do that. So that's why we understand that it's necessary, and I've talked a lot about personal income tax in recent times, and when you have the situation that the average wage earner in this country next year is going to be in the second highest tax bracket, you know you've got a problem. And that means you need to apply your mind to what all the potential solutions are to ensure that you can come up with a system which is going to support growth and jobs in the economy. Now, we acknowledge that. I can't agree with you that I think necessarily the opposition does, because they've decided basically not to turn up to the table at all.
Well, what about the idea of where the Australian people are at? You say that people understand. Certainly the economists do. There seems to be almost universal agreement that tax reform is required. How much effort do you think the government has to do to be able to bring Australians on board with the fact that this is a requirement now, before you then get down to the nitty-gritty of what changes?
Well, I think an enormous amount. And I think one of the issues here is that income tax, personal income tax in particular, has become a silent tax in Australia. It's not unlike the wholesale sales tax was back in the late 1990s. Everyone was paying it, but not everyone knew how much they were paying. Now, with personal income tax these days, now I remember getting a pay check, an actual check, and it had a pay slip with it, and it told you how much tax you get paid. These days, that's not a common experience. And you know, equally with income tax, you pay it all year. You often don't see what's getting taken out of your pocket every single day, every single week, and you go to the ATM and you pull out your money, and it doesn't say on there that you paid 19 cents in the dollar, or 45 plus the Medicare levy plus the deficit reduction levy, or 32.5 cents or 37 cents. It doesn't say that. And at the end of the year, people will often get a tax rebate and see the personal income tax system as some sort of vending machine at the end of the year where you get money back. Well, that is hiding something that's happening in this country, and that is people are paying more and more income tax every single year because of the inflation tax which comes with bracket creep, and we need to have this conversation with Australians and saying, you're getting taxed more than you should be. I would like you to take more of your pay home. That's what I'd like to see.
Can I ask something just quickly? Is everything's meant to be on the table? Is it on the table to change income taxing so that it actually rises with CPI, for example, to avoid the bracket creep element?
Well, last time there was serious changes to the tax system in this country, which was done by Peter Costello. Others have tried with John Howard. Others have tried, but they've failed. And tax system changes have not occurred in any meaningful way since. They made very big changes to the personal income tax system back then, and those changes survived a very, very long time. But all of these things need to be considered. I think it's right to say, well, how do you construct your system going forward to ensure there's the right protections in there? But the most important thing is people who are out there every day giving it everything they've got, knowing that they have to deal with it. And I mean, they're realists. They understand what's happening in the world and what's happening in our own economy. They know things have changed with the mining boom and the next phase we're in, and that we need to go through an adjustment, and there are changes that they are seeking to make. They just want the tax system to back them, and it's not.
You've been really critical of the income tax system today in this program and last week. In fact, you were damning about it last week, about the cost, about the inefficiencies of the personal income tax system. Given the magnitude of this critique, can we assume the logic of all this is the government will go to the next election looking at some sort of significant changes to the personal income tax system?
Well, I'm taking it one step at a time, and we're engaging with the states and territories, but my critique and the Prime Minister's and the government's critique of what's happening in personal income taxes suggest that if you are going to address that problem, if we can get some agreement that that is a very big problem that we need to fix, because it's that is going to have the incentives that work in the economy, so you grow the economy. Now, if you agree with that, then you obviously need a very significant change to bring that about. Now, I've noticed other proposals that are around, and of course everything's on the table. We've said we're going to be looking at superannuation issues. We are already acting on multinational taxation. In fact, we're ahead of the curve. We're leading the world on making sure that income earned here in Australia by multinationals will be taxed here. And to suggest otherwise, as some have, I think is just to blatantly lie to the Australian people. We are doing everything that needs to be done and more on multinational tax. But these issues themselves, I mean, Labor has proposals on two of those. It's $3.8 billion over the forward estimates. I mean, that is a change at the margin that they've put forward, which won't deal with a substantive issue that we have in our tax system, and we're up for dealing with the substantive issues.
I know no decisions are yet taken, but you've just said you want to deal with the substantive issues. So the logic of all this, I think, is pretty clear. The main way you can create space to do something about personal income tax is to raise more revenue through the indirect tax system.
We're in a position where, you know, we don't get to act unilaterally here, Paul. And that's why the collaborative process we're engaged in is important. I think Malcolm Turnbull's been making a really important point lately, and that is we're a pragmatic government. We're a very pragmatic government which understands that the one thing the Australian people reward and appreciate is results. And to get the result, you've got to work with others. Now, we have a very clear objective in this area. We don't want to see the tax burden increased on Australians. We don't think the way you grow your economy is by increasing the tax burden. And that's why any change to the tax system needs to have in it the swings and roundabouts, which means Australians are better off. I mean, you wouldn't do this if Australians weren't better off as a result of doing it. So he's talking about us, and I agree. We are a very pragmatic government. That means we must engage with the states and territories to come up with a collaborative outcome.
Okay, well, you are engaging with the states and territories, and you've been pretty positive about that engagement. But let me ask you, is it feasible to think that you can actually strike some sort of overall agreement with them on the principles of a tax package?
Well, the reason I'm optimistic is the engagement I've had with the states and territories has not had a partisan flavour to it. I mean, we've got Labor states and Liberal states at the present having different positions, some for, some against. So what that says to me is this debate isn't a partisan one between the states and territories and the Commonwealth. What we all agree is we have to grow our economies, and particularly state and territory treasurers, and myself as a treasurer know that that is our principal goal. And that is what is actually driving, I think, our discussions. There isn't the partisan conflict in this, and at least between the states and territories and the Commonwealth. I can't say that for the opposition federally, who have taken, I think, a very partisan position on that. But look, the Australian people will judge them for that in their own way, and I'll leave that to them. But what we're engaged in, I think, is a positive dialogue, and I am optimistic, but I don't make any presumptions about it. And I think that's always been key to my approach. I'm not going to presume an outcome from someone. I'm going to work with them to try and achieve it.
Okay, well, I guess the sort of problem here for you, the dilemma for you is we've got federal Labor has already declared its position. It's going to oppose any change to the GST, any substantive change. Labor's already campaigning against this. What's the attitude of the Labor states when you're dealing with them privately? Is that the sort of sentiment that they express privately, or have they got a different view and a different outlook?
Well, they're their own governments, and the difference is they're governments. And they know that they have a responsibility to government and get outcomes and get things done and grow their economies. So that immediately sets them apart from federal Labor. They actually need to get something done. They're not engaged in the politics of this, they're engaged in the outcomes of this as the Commonwealth Government is. And so I think that gives us a real point of connection to work together. I mean, that is the nature of the engagement. I mean, we're paid to get an outcome, all of us, regardless of what side of politics we're on.
If the primary goal is to reduce income tax, though, and and something like consumption tax, the GST is a state tax. How does that work, that they get more of the GST potentially, but income taxes go down? Does that mean that there are less Commonwealth grants, for example, to the states?
Well, everyone who's coming to this table has their objectives, and the states and territories have theirs. I think I've been pretty clear about what ours are, and a pragmatic government is going to work through those issues and come to a position of agreement. Otherwise, you're acting unilaterally, and that's the last thing we'd want to do, is to act unilaterally in this area. We'd like to do it with the support, and not just of the states and territories, but we're engaging with ACOS, we're engaging with ACCI, we're engaging with the Business Council. The Prime Minister's met with the union movement. We're engaging with everybody who wants to engage with us. The only people who made it pretty clear they're not going to engage is the opposition. Now, that raises a question for them. I think we will get to a point where there is a very clear way forward. We already know what our objectives are. They need to... There is no real credible plan. I mean, they can shout at the clouds all they like and shake their fists and do all of that, but at the end of the day, they've got to come up with a credible plan, and at the moment there's no credible plan and they're not a credible alternative.
Just how important do you think is the attitude of former Labor premiers? I mean, we've had a range of former Labor premiers now becoming quite outspoken on this issue. For example, former Labor Premier from Queensland, Peter Beattie, the very strong comments from former Victorian Labor Premier, John Brumby. What's your response to these comments?
Well, I welcome those comments, but I also welcome the others, which maybe not as supportive of some real changes. That's because we're engaged in this dialogue. And if you want to participate in it, that's great. Because I think what it highlights is that there are problems that need to be solved. Now, people might have different takes on how they can be achieved. We certainly are, forming, views about this, but doing it, I think, in a very step-by-step way and taking people with us. But I think that's the key to it. For this to succeed, people need to understand that there's a problem you've got to solve in the first place, and that's where the Prime Minister and I and the government is very focused. The problem that we need to solve is our tax system is not backing Australians who are out there doing everything they can to transition our economy, to diversify our economy, to create opportunities for themselves, to save for their future. It's not getting that job done. And that's the task that we've set ourselves to fix that.
Labor says that it won't even consider any changes to the GST consumption taxes because they are regressive, full stop, end of debate. What's the government's response to that?
Well, I'm not even going to entertain them because they're not actually part of the debate. I mean, if they actually want to be part of the debate, well, good. But at the moment, look, as we go forward on this, there'll be all sorts of people who sort of come into this debate or pretend to. There'll be the purists who, will want this thing developed in a laboratory, hermetically sealed and then presented to the public. And I talked about my good friend Jim Molan earlier this week on Never Rush to Failure. Well, another thing he said that, those sorts of plans never survive contact with the enemy. And as a result, you've got to have something that's practical and realistic and collaborative and worked up. But there'll be others who just simply want to be opportunists in this debate. And they want to engage with the debate to pursue a political advantage. And look, I think the Australian people can work that out.
But if you're prepared to leave something on the table which has regressive elements to it, I mean, it's not as regressive a tax, I think, as Labor suggests.
Well, the Productivity Commission, I think, just revealed that recently in a very good piece of work. Yeah.
But is there a way to deal with any outlying elements of regressive taxes? A number of taxes that we have in the system are regressive or have elements of being regressive to them. Is there a way that governments can reduce that? Well,
compensation or adjustments, whatever you want to call them, are not new. I mean, back in 2001 when there was the change to the tax system that took place, there were compensation measures that were put in place, and I've seen no research or no evidence which suggested that those compensation measures didn't do the job. In fact, what I've seen is they overcompensated. And that would be not surprising, given at the time they were introducing a whole new taxing arrangement, and there are a lot of uncertainties. I mean, there are uncertainties about the BAS back then, there are uncertainties about a lot of the implementation issues. Well, that's all now settled now. And today we're in a far better position, whatever changes to the tax system are contemplated, I think, to calibrate and to design and ensure that there are the appropriate adjustments in place to ensure that Australians are better off better off. That's our goal, that they be better off.
But not individuals. Not in. I mean, the government's not going to fall into this trap, is it, of arguing that there will be no person or persons worse off. Groups, sure, the aim is to ensure that everybody overall is better off, but you can't ensure every individual.
Those sorts of questions and raising those sorts of issues, I think, is part of one of the things that has held debate back for the last 8 years, and the government certainly has moved out of the last 8-year period where rule in, rule out, gotcha politics, you know, all of that sort of thing, basically euthanised public policy debate in this country for a very long time. Now, we've moved on from that. It's a refreshing, exciting time now, and I think Australians are responding to the Prime Minister's leadership on this. Malcolm has brought that energy back, the animal spirits that Glenn Stevens refers to, and I think this is very positive. And we've seen it already in the lift in both business and consumer confidence. Now, these numbers do move around a bit, but I think now we've seen some encouraging signs on that front, and particularly in the non-mining sector, and particularly when they're looking forward to employment expectations as well. I mean, it's already true that employment growth at the moment is 10 times what it was back in 2013, and that's great, but it needs to be stronger, and that's why you need to change the tax system, and we need to have a response to Hilma that works through the states, and I'm sure we can chat about that a bit more.
Well, we'll come to the economy in just...
Harper, I should say. I just said Hilma.
In just a minute. But still on tax, I mean, we're all excited, but there are some real problems, and one of them is how you distribute the revenue given all the demands on the revenue. That is, you've got demands for compensation, you'll have demands from the states, and you all want to, as you've just indicated, do something about personal income tax. How can you meet all these demands?
Well, I think all of these are soluble issues, Paul. I don't think they're anywhere near the concerns that might be being raised in this area. I mean, and that's why, you know, getting people around the table and understanding and coming to a shared view about what can be achieved in this area is important. And this is why I do introduce Harper. The Harper reforms and the Harper recommendations are all about liberating important areas of our economy at the micro level, at state and territory level, whether it's in the human services area, whether it's in state planning and zoning laws. All of these areas will open up economic growth and greater choice. And this is why I have not been very subtle about it. I have linked, as the Prime Minister has, we have linked the competition reforms with this discussion about tax system changes. They are inextricably linked, because the Australian people, I don't think, will cop any changes in the tax system just to give the states a bucket of money to spend it as they are now. They would expect to see any changes to result in better services, more choices, better spending. I mean, we're controlling our spending. We're getting on top of our spending, and spending as a percentage of GDP will fall over the budget and forward estimates, and they'll be expecting the same things from states and territories. No one just gets a bucket of money.
We're talking to the Treasurer, Scott Morrison. We're going to take a break here on Australia. Welcome back. You're watching Australian Agenda, where Paul Kelly and I are speaking to the Treasurer, Scott Morrison. Mr Morrison, let me ask you about growth and I guess perception in politics, because one of the problems with forward estimates, particularly during the Labor years, was that the growth forecasts never came true, and as a result their claimed return to surplus, or at least paying down of debt, never ultimately happened. We've got a situation now where it looks like the growth forecasts, even though they were down on what they'd previously been in the May budget, are going to be down further still when you deliver MyEFO. At least that's the Reserve Bank's view. How do you deal with the perception, therefore, that the government is struggling to meet its objectives around reducing debt?
Well, first of all, I mean, there are projections in the budget and then there are forecasts, and the projections, which are in the last 2 years of the out years, they are based on the long run average. So they're not Treasury saying this is what we think is going to happen. They are simply a default position, and this has been around for some time.
But does that need to change, do you think? Well, because otherwise we always seem to miss them.
I think that's a very interesting question, and I know Treasury are having a very close look at those types of issues. So I need to separate what our projections, which are just a simple arithmetic placement of a long-term average in those last years, and then, you know, the forecasts which are in the early years. It would also be a mistake to assume that changes in real GDP growth have a linear implication for issues of revenue and spending. I mean, there are many. Nominal GDP is far more important on those issues, and from the last election down to the current year, in terms of the adjustment that was made, I mean, that's been a 2 percentage point adjustment in nominal GDP, and now that has a fairly significant impact on, and has, as you've seen, some of those parameter estimates change over that period of time. So, look, the good story about growth is this, though, and Glenn Stevens made this point. the headwinds are at their strongest at the moment in terms of the reduction in commodity prices, in the terms of trade and what's happened there, the reduction in mining investment. I mean, they are always going to have a very strong impact on our economy. But despite that, we're growing. Last year, 2.3% year average growth. That's more than twice what Canada has experienced.
I know that, Minister, but isn't the reality, as various people have said, including the Governor, that at the moment we are in a phase of below-trend growth? Obviously you accept that. The question is...
It's an arithmetic fact.
Of course it's a fact.
And of course the trend growth is based on the biggest commodities boom the country's ever seen.
Sure,
So,
sure. But I guess the question is, how long are we going to be in this phase of below-trend growth, and where do we end up?
Well, both the RBA and Treasury and others, and I should say private forecasters, have us getting back above 3% in the years ahead. But as the Prime Minister and I have said, we're not pretending to be Nostradamus about any of these things. I mean, what we will focus on is what our response is to these issues. And what we are seeing is an improvement in the non-mining sector. What we have seen, and the Governor's statement this week also pointed very heavily to the changes that are happening in the services sector, and particularly business conditions in the service sector. Now, they're all very encouraging signs. And so our job is to not commentate on the numbers and what they might be down the track. Tom Petrosky can do that. What we'll do is focus on the changes to policy that need to be put in place to ensure that we can drive growth and jobs.
And that's what you're doing.
There were 8 issues that I outlined at the speech you had earlier this week.
Sure, okay. But if we look at the budget, isn't the reality that we do have a revenue problem?
Well, tell me what you think a revenue problem is.
Well, a revenue problem is that we've had very substantial revenue write-downs which have damaged the budget, and we continue to have them.
But is that because we're not taxing people enough?
I didn't say that.
No,
I just
because
asked.
that's what a revenue problem is.
No,
that's how I define a revenue problem.
Well, all I'm saying is clearly we've got a revenue problem because the revenue has been falling away. So I'm asking you, do you think we have a revenue problem?
Well, a revenue problem I would define as not taxing people enough, and that you need to tax people more to lift your revenue. I don't think we have that problem. I think the issue we've had is revenue is below trend at the moment, but is forecast to be above trend over the course of the budget and forward estimates, and projected to do that as well. So as you grow your economy, particularly as we see and seek to support an increase in nominal GDP, which would see revenues rise. I mean, our problem at the moment is that Australians aren't earning enough. Not that they're not paying enough tax, but we're not earning enough. And that's why things like the trade agreements are so important. That's why productivity reforms are so important, because that's what can lift real wages. Now, real wages growth has been very flat in this country for some period of time now. Now, the government earns its income off people earning more. And that's why I said this week, I want to see Australians earn more, and I want to see Australians take home more. There are 2 ways you can get a pay rise in this country. One comes from your employer because of productivity improvements and the performance of the business, and the other is because income tax rates reduce.
Okay, all that's fine. Let's talk then about the spending side. Spending, of course, is high, 25.9% of GDP, which you're obviously concerned about. So I therefore ask you, how confident are you that the Turnbull government can tackle the spending side of the budget and tackle it more effectively than did Tony Abbott and Joe Hockey?
It is a big challenge. But over the budget and forward estimates, where we'll have my EFA later this year, which will give an update.
Which is going to be pretty ugly.
We'll have an update on where we're at on that task.
So what will you do about it?
I'm confident that we will still have a trajectory which will see the deficit reducing, which it is currently projected to do at about 0.5% of GDP every year, that we will continue on that track. That we will continue to be at a point where our expenditure as a percentage of GDP will continue to decline, and that's what the forward estimates and projections are, and that's what Matthias Cormann and I are laser-like focused on in ERC as we work through all the various demands on the public purse, and that is our focus.
But
you've got to control spending.
I mean, we know all the problems that the Abbott government got into attempting to do something on the spending side. Spending is too high. You've said spending is too high. You've said you intend to tackle it. So how do you do this in a way which is acceptable to the public?
Well, it is already happening, Paul. I mean, I'll give you an example. I mean, we took through the Parliament the pension reforms earlier this year. Now, they kick in not this financial year, but next financial year. So as a result, we will see those sorts of savings measures and other things we've done in recent times kick in over the forward estimates. Now, we have got a plan to control expenditure. It was outlined in the last budget and the budget before that, and there have been some big changes to the first budget we brought down as a government. A lot of those measures, whether it's in pensions or family tax benefits or other things, have been re-engineered, and to put them in a format where we believe they present a far fairer and a far more achievable set of changes which can be supported by the Parliament. Now, at the end of the day, the Parliament is sovereign and they'll decide what to pass and what not to pass. But let's understand that the only reason that you would need to have a discussion with crossbenchers in the Senate is because the Labor Party opposes the changes. They have some $62 billion of commitments in terms of expenditure cuts and changes that we put in place that they said certainly haven't denied that they want to reverse. They've got their own spending measures, and then they've got measures that they themselves proposed when they were in government and oppose now. Now, they're hanging out there with around $62 billion worth of commitments over and above what are in our books, and they've come up with around $5 billion to pay for them. Now, Australian people can make their own judgment about where Labor sits when it comes to the challenges on expenditure. But our projection on expenditure is it will reduce as a percentage of GDP over the budget and forward estimates. That's what we're working to, and we already have measures in place that are tied to those forecasts.
How concerned are you just about the unavoidable demographics of the country going forward, the ageing of the population? Yes, there's possible changes around superannuation, but the ageing of the population, the smaller working cohort of the population, the number of handouts that are provided that people have culturally decided are part of their lives and that are difficult to therefore remove. It is, and all of that is at the same time as we have a Senate, which has been a problem now and more of a problem for a long time.
Our government is alive to the issues, but I'm not pessimistic about them. I don't.
How can't you be?
Well, because I don't see the ageing of the population as a terminal illness for the country economically. I don't. I actually see the ageing of the population presenting some real economic opportunities for us. I mean, for example, in the human services, in the aged care sector, if we're able to unlock more of the capital that sits in people in their retirement years and encourage them to be more active in the economy, the opportunities we have in China, particularly that we can now run aged care facilities in China. We have enormous experience in this country of doing that. The opportunities for us to be a service leader for ageing services, not just obviously here in our own country, but around the world, is enormous. And we're not alone in these challenges. In fact, other countries are ageing at a far higher rate than we are. And so we are in the box seat, I think, to be able to be the leading provider of ageing services in the world.
To do something about that side.
An ageing boom, Peter. An ageing boom.
Well, I mean, us having the lesser...
You need to be more optimistic.
Well, I'm glad for it at a personal level, but I just wonder at a society level, the sort of changes that need to go with it. For example, you talk about unlocking the wealth from the ageing of the population. The family home, which is tax exempt and is not required to have the equity drawn on from it for somebody in their retirement. Surely that's the kind of thing that is politically difficult, but is absolutely economically necessary.
I don't always leap to that conclusion, which I know you regularly do with some enthusiasm. I think there are a range of other areas which we're looking at as part of what we're looking at on superannuation that I think can further encourage people to unlock their capital in their retirement years and have a better quality of life as a result, and not being held back by some of the weirdness of the system. But at the same time, let's understand what the purpose of tax incentives for superannuation is in the first place. It's so someone can be independent in retirement.
But the funny thing is, that's just the point. Absolutely it is.
And so the system needs to reflect that.
But the funny thing, the bizarre thing is that for years now we've had all these incentives put in place for people to save for their retirement, and even though the amount of money that goes into super has been going up over the years, we haven't seen a change in the number of people, the percentage of the population that draw on the pension.
Yeah, but you have seen a change in the split between a part pension and a full pension. And if you look at the intergenerational report, you'll see the statistics on part and full pension completely invert over the course of the next 30 or 40 years.
Enough to satisfy you, though?
Oh, no, absolutely not. That's why when we look at superannuation, unlike our opponents, we don't look at it as some big tax bucket, which they do. What we see is the need to have a system which ensures people can be independent in their retirement and not drawing on a pension. That's why I've talked about the need for greater flexibility on the contribution side for people who have disruptions to their working life. And I'm not just talking about women. I mean, we all know carers in our own lives who, through no fault of their own, through the worst deal of a hand in life's experience, find themselves caring full-time for a partner, a loved one, a child, a parent, and it's very hard for them to catch up. It's very hard for them to get back and regather the pace. And the system does penalise them for doing that at the moment. And these are the sorts of flexibilities. So what you'll hear from us on superannuation is a program to help people be independent in their retirement and give them more opportunities to do that, and have the tax incentive very focused on achieving that goal. Not to develop inheritance pools or things like this, but to ensure that people can be independent in retirement, fit for purpose. That's what a pragmatic government does, and that's what we're focused on.
Now, your opponent, Chris Bowen, has declared yet again this week, I am a Keynesian.
Good for him.
Are you a Keynesian?
Good for him.
Are you a Keynesian?
I'm a Liberal, and I'm an Australian, and I'm focused on...
Are you a Keynesian?
Oh, look, I don't get into that.
He's put up the flag.
Well, good for him. I don't intend to respond to how he wants to label himself, you know, what football team he goes for, or what faction he's in the Labor Party. Good for him. He can wear it on his blazer, he can get a scarf, and he can cheer for Keynes all the way from to here at the bank and back again. But I'm focused on what's the best.
That's not your banner. That's not your banner.
My banner is a Liberal banner. My banner is a banner for growth and jobs in the economy. I'm a pragmatist. I'm not an ideologue. I'm focused on getting the job done. If he wants to write papers for the Keynesian Weekly and get terribly excited about that, I wish him all the best. I'm focused on having policies that work, not that satisfy some sort of ideological zealotry. I'm focused on having policies that work, because that's what the Australian people want.
Well,
I don't think they're that interested on whether he's a Keynesian or a Calathumpian.
Well, let's talk about policies that work. The Prime Minister and yourself are busy on the innovation statement, which will come out next month. We had a warning this week from the head of the Productivity Commission, Peter Harris, that old-fashioned tax breaks and R&D incentives when it comes to innovation didn't work in the past, and they won't work in the future. Are you going to take that message on board with the innovation statement?
I think he makes some very good and astute observations about this. It's the old thing. If you keep doing the same thing all the time, why would you expect a different outcome? And Christopher Pyne has been in the driver's seat of our innovation agenda, working to the most, I think, excited and focused Prime Minister on innovation we have seen as a country. I don't think anyone would dispute that. The Prime Minister Malcolm's already made it, I think, the banner of his approach to government, and Christopher has been there working the details.
But what's going to be
team.
different? What's going to be different about this statement? I know Malcolm Turnbull has talked about
you'll know when it's released.
Well, in terms of the parameters, there's been plenty of talk here about an agile economy. We're all excited. There's going to be more innovation. When you boil it all down, is this actually going to be a new policy agenda?
Of course it will be. Of course it will be, and the statement will make that clear, and you won't have to wait too much longer. I know that there's a keen appetite to see what is happening, particularly in that area, and that's why we've made sure that will be one of the first big items that is released by the government under Malcolm Turnbull. Now, that's not to say we haven't already had some key policy announcements. We had the response to the financial systems inquiry. There'll be a response to the Harper review before the end of the year. There'll be obviously MyEFO, but I wouldn't overstate that. MyEFO is a budget update. That's what it is. That's what it's always been. I have no ambitions for it to be anything more than that. But there is a lot to do between now and the end of the year. The innovation statement will sit at the heart of that, and Christopher Pyne, together with the Prime Minister and other ministers like myself, have been working working feverishly on this.
Okay.
But what is it about? It's about ensuring that you can get ideas and innovations into commercialised products. It's about ensuring that you can have companies that benefit not just at what you'd call the sexy end of the innovation, the hipster bids and the garages and the apps and all that sort of, that's all really important. I think it's really important. But how innovation and changes to business processes can change a normal small business or a large business and the productivity that flows from that. And I come back to what Australians are earning. Australians won't earn more in higher real wages unless we can lift the productivity performance of the country. And that's what the innovation statement is really about unleashing. What's productivity? Australians realising their potential at work and businesses realising their potential.
Is Christopher Pyne the right person to drive the innovation agenda? He's been in Parliament since he was 25.
He absolutely is. I don't know of anyone other than the Prime Minister who's as passionate about this as Christopher, and he's had a lot of experience in knowing how you actually get things to happen in politics. And that, I think, is another key performance criteria for people in this government. It's based on what you get done, and Christopher Pyne is someone who gets something done.
Okay, what's going to be the central issue of the 2016 election?
We're still some way away from that, Paul, but what I think it will be about is about growth and jobs in our economy. And that's why we were talking this week about this national platform for economic growth and jobs in our economy. Whether it's the $50 billion national infrastructure plan that we're rolling out, whether it's the trade agreements, which we've already had so much success with, but we've still got some distance to travel on things like India and so on, whether it's what's happening with continued strengthening of our financial system, whether it's what we're doing to deal with workplace productivity and ensuring that we have collaborative workplaces and we have people in those workplaces who can deal constructively with their employers and get better outcomes there. All of this, whether it's tax system or anything else, is all about growth and jobs in the economy. That's the bottom line to our economic plan.
Treasurer Scott Morrison, you've been generous with your time. We appreciate you joining us on Australian Agenda. Thank you.
Thanks, gentlemen. Good.